A daylight trench raid. In the early afternoon of December the 15th, Second Lieutenant G.W. Miller and 20 other ranks executed a daring trench raid near Monchy Le Preux, just to the east of Arras. The raid was to take place in front of saps 4 and 5, which had been rehearsed a day or two before in the transport lines. At the time, writes Sgt Manning, the battalion was out at rest at Pick Caves on the Arras front, and mostly employed as working parties. On the night of the 17th, and just a quick note here, the regimental history suggests that the raid took place on the 21st of December, which seems to be clearly wrong. It took place on the 15th of December, and the events being described here probably happened around the 12th or the 13th of December. Anyway, returning to Sergeant Manning's narrative. Company Sergeant Major West detailed 20 men to prepare for a raiding party, and we proceeded to St Nicholas for 3 days training. The party consisted of an officer, the sergeant, which is Sergeant Manning, who we see in the picture on the slide here now, a corporal, and 18 men. The raid was arranged to take place at 12:45 p.m, i.e. just after midday, on the 21st, correction, it's the 15th, the object being to penetrate into the German lines as far as possible to seek information and capture a prisoner. On the morning of the day of the raid, we went to Pick Caves, where we were stripped of anything that might lead to identity, and were given an identity disc by a number only, from 1 to 20. On assembling in front of the line in the front line trench, we split up into 3 squads, and were given orders to advance on the first shell being fired of the creeping barrage that was to cover and support us in our advancement and retirement. And the image on the screen at the moment is a map taken from the Brigade War Diary, which includes some overlays showing where machine gun barrages were to be fired, where artillery barrages were to be fired, and where a smoke barrage was to be fired. To our surprise, the front line, German line, was unoccupied, and continuing, we discovered the second line also empty, with the exception of a few posts concealed in dugouts, the entrances which we could not discover, though we had good cause to know they were there. Carrying on into the third line, we came up to enemy force, and the fun commenced. Due to our inability to get in touch quickly with the Germans, we were much behind time, and the barrage began to creep back, and consequently we were between our own fire and the barrage the Germans put down. I was in charge of the squad in the centre and had lost touch with the squad on the left, but remained in touch with the other squad of 2nd Lieutenant Miller, who had 6 men. He signalled me to retire to our lines, and shortly after commencing to do so, I saw a shell burst right amongst Lieutenant Miller's squad. Although we could not get near them, it appeared as though all of them were killed, which later proved to be the case. The shelling and rifle fire was so intense that it was impossible to control a party, and it became a case of every man for himself. We all made for our line, which the survivors reached. 12, I believe. But we hadn't been away for over 25 minutes. I scrambled through with a fractured ankle. After reassembling at headquarters, we were sent to Arras for a rest. Now, the general officer commanding the 4th Division, Major Torquil George Matheson, was highly pleased with the manner in which the raid was undertaken, and he wrote to the battalion's commanding officer, "I watched your raid at 1 p.m. today through my telescope, and I wish to congratulate you and your battalion on the magnificent effort they made. It did me good to watch them go over. Nothing could have been better than the way they sprang out of the trench together. I'm most awfully sorry that those poor fellows were killed. I fear it was from our own artillery, and I fancy I saw it happen. Our artillery was not, however, to blame. It was due to the keenness and magnificent spirit of the men of your regiment, as they pushed on too close to the barrage line. Of course, they went too far, but it was a fine sight, striving as they could to find a Hun somewhere. I shall never forget the sight, and congratulate you most heartily on commanding such splendid fellows." Now, I have managed to identify 5 casualties to the battalion that day, and this does include 2nd Lieutenant Miller, who was the leader of the raid. And as none of them have a known grave, it's quite likely these are the raiding party casualties. And if we remember, they weren't wearing their normal ID tags, they were only carrying a disc that said a number between 1 and 20. So all 5 of these casualties have no known grave, and are therefore commemorated on the Arras Memorial. Returning to the post-raid photo, it's interesting to see the ripped clothing on some of the men, the pickaxe, which possibly had been taken as weapons, but also that Sergeant Manning appears to have a boot missing, perhaps linked to his fractured ankle. The battalion was to be relieved a few days later and come out of the line, and were able to get their Christmas dinner a day or so before Christmas Day. And on Christmas Day, the officers of the battalion went up to the line to recce trenches they were going to be taken over. And on Boxing Day, the 26th of December 1917, the battalion was to return to the front line, once again in the Arras area. And ultimately, it was to stay in this area until the early part of 1918, which is where we will pick things up in the next episode, because they're going to find themselves in the front line during the March 1918 offensives when the Germans attack. So hopefully you're enjoying these little videos. If you do, please like and subscribe. Comment, let me know kind of what bits are interesting, what you'd like to see more of, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.